She thought it was just a job, breastfeeding a millionaire's baby, but what he did next, no one expected it. The soft whimper of her newborn daughter echoed through the tiny, dimly lit room. Lena Brooks sat at the edge of her creaky bed, gently rocking Hazel in her arms, her body aching from exhaustion. The heater had gone out again, and the cold of the Kentucky winter seeped through the thin apartment walls. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since morning. But she smiled down at Hazel anyway, brushing a strand of dark hair from her baby's forehead. "You first," she whispered. "Always you first." Lena was 29, but the weight of life had aged her soul far beyond her years. She had fought hard to become a nurse, squeezing in night classes, working double shifts, sacrificing friendships and joy. And still, here she was, barely surviving. The hospital where she worked part-time had become more than her job. It was the only place where she felt in control, even as her world crumbled outside of it. That rainy Tuesday afternoon, she stood in the break room waiting for the kettle to boil when something caught her eye. A strange piece of paper fluttering slightly on the old bulletin board, right between a flyer for CPR classes and a missing cat notice. Her eyes narrowed as she stepped closer. "Urgent. Live-in caregiver and wet nurse needed. Private estate. Excellent pay. Discretion required." She read it again. And again. Wet nurse? Who even used that term anymore? The whole thing sounded outdated, suspicious even, like something from a Victorian novel. But something deep inside her stirred, a gut feeling, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, this was a sign, an opening, a chance. That night, after putting Hazel to sleep, Lena called the number listed. Her voice trembled as she left a message, expecting nothing. To her surprise, someone returned the call within the hour. "Miss Lena Brooks?" a polished voice asked. "This is Elaine Duval, assistant to Mr. Grant Whitmore. We received your interest." "Mr. Whitmore?" Lena asked, confused. "Yes. The position is still open, but it is urgent. If you are available to travel, we can send transportation immediately." Something about the woman's voice was formal but kind, as if she knew Lena was hesitating, as if she understood. "You may bring your daughter. All accommodations will be provided. You will not want for anything, Miss Brooks." The name Grant Whitmore clicked in Lena's memory like a thunderclap. He was the Grant Whitmore, widowed millionaire, the one whose wife had died suddenly during childbirth. The tabloids had had a field day. Rumors swirled that he never left his estate, that he hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks, that he was broken. Why would someone like him need her? Lena's heart pounded in her chest. This could be dangerous. But what if it wasn't? What if it was the miracle she'd been praying for on those sleepless nights, whispering silent cries to a God she wasn't sure still heard her? She thought of Hazel's chubby cheeks, the way her lips twitched when she dreamed, the tiny coos she made at dawn. Lena looked around the apartment. The peeling paint, the unpaid bills on the table, the cracked window sealed with duct tape. Her decision came like a wave crashing against tired bones. The next morning, as dawn broke through the gray sky, Lena packed a small duffel bag with baby clothes, diapers, and the only picture she had of her late parents. She dressed Hazel in her softest pink sleeper, kissed her gently on the nose, and wrapped her in a blanket handmade by her grandmother. She hesitated for only a second, looking around the apartment one last time. It didn't feel like home. Not anymore. A Blacktown car arrived at exactly 9 a.m. A well-dressed driver opened the door without speaking. He simply nodded and gestured. Lena climbed in, holding Hazel close to her chest. As the car rolled out of town, she felt the distance between her old life and whatever lay ahead stretch like a rubber band about to snap. The countryside blurred past the window as Hazel slept peacefully in her arms. But Lena's mind raced. Where was she going? Who was this man who needed a stranger to care for his child? And what had happened behind those iron gates that made the world whisper his name in half fear, half pity? She didn't know it yet, but nothing in her life was ever going to be the same, and neither was his. The car slowed to a crawl, tires crunching over a long gravel driveway lined with sycamore trees that stretched their arms toward the gray sky. Lena leaned forward, her breath catching as the Whitmore estate came into view. The mansion was massive, like something from an old novel or a dream too big for reality. Ivy curled around stone pillars, and tall black gates loomed behind them like silent sentinels. The windows were high and shadowed, giving the impression that someone, or something, was always watching. Hazel stirred in her arms, and Lena held her tighter. A housekeeper greeted her at the front door with a polite nod and silent hands. No introduction, no warmth, just the chill of wealth and mourning. Inside, the estate was spotless, not a cushion out of place, not a single photograph on the walls. It was beautiful, yes, but cold. The air hung heavy with something unspoken, like loss had moved in and made itself at home. She followed the housekeeper through endless halls, the floors polished so perfectly that Lena could see her own nervous reflection beneath her worn shoes. They passed tall oil paintings of people she didn't recognize, generations of Whitmores, all with the same icy blue eyes. Finally, the housekeeper stopped outside a thick wooden door. "He's inside," she said simply. Lena swallowed hard. When the door opened, her breath caught. There he was, Grant Whitmore. He stood near the grand fireplace, back turned, cradling a small bundle wrapped in pale blue. He didn't move as she entered, didn't look up. He was tall, broad shoulders, dark hair tousled like he hadn't slept in weeks, and dressed in a black sweater and slacks that looked expensive yet rumpled. He looked like a man who had once been powerful, and now only wanted to disappear. "You're the nurse?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. "Yes," Lena said softly, adjusting Hazel in her arms. He turned. His face was beautiful in a tragic sort of way, chiseled, haunted, those famous blue eyes hollow from grief. He didn't look at Hazel. "My son's name is Caleb," he said. "He's not taking formula. He cries all night. Nothing helps." Lena's heart ached as she looked at the tiny baby, face red and scrunched with frustration, fists curled tightly in pain. He was hungry, angry, confused. "You'll live in the West Wing," Grant said, turning back to the fire. "You'll care for Caleb, feed him, and that's all. Nothing more." Lena nodded, even as her chest tightened at his coldness. "You may keep your daughter with you, but you are not to enter the East Wing, ever." His voice was firm, distant, as if spoken from behind thick glass. "I understand," Lena replied. A long silence passed between them. Then, without another word, he gently placed Caleb in the nearby bassinet and walked out of the room. "No thank you, no welcome, just silence." Lena sat down slowly, still holding Hazel. Both babies were crying now. She whispered gently to them, soft lullabies her own mother used to sing, and carefully brought Caleb close to her chest. At first, he resisted, but then, a miracle. He latched on. His cries softened, then stopped. Lena felt her eyes sting with tears, not just from the pain, but from the connection. This child. He was so small, so innocent, and yet already grieving. Hazel, not one to be left out, gave a jealous squeak, and Lena laughed gently as she cradled both in her arms. Two babies, two broken hearts, and one woman holding them both together. Later that night, as she lay in the guest bedroom in the West Wing, far too big and cold for comfort, Lena stared up at the ceiling and listened to the silence. Where was Grant now? Sitting in his office alone, looking at photos of a woman he'd loved and lost? Why had he chosen her for this job? Out of everyone, there was something in his eyes that haunted her. Something more than grief. Something buried. A secret, maybe. A story untold. Lena didn't know if she belonged here. But as Hazel curled against her side and Caleb slept in the bassinet by her bed, she knew this much. She had been brought here for a reason. And whatever it was, it had just begun. Time inside the Whitmore estate passed like fog rolling over a mountain, slow, quiet, and heavy with unspoken things. Lena had fallen into a strange rhythm, almost like sleepwalking. She nursed both babies, Caleb in the early dawn hours, Hazel just after. She whispered lullabies in the great stone nursery, her voice echoing off the tall walls painted in shades of faded blue. She prepared simple meals in the too-silent kitchen, always alone, always watched by unseen eyes from the grand halls. The estate was beautiful, yes, but suffocating. No laughter, no light, just stillness. And Grant Whitmore was a ghost in his own home. He appeared in glimpses, sometimes on the balcony outside the study, sometimes watching from across the nursery as Lena soothed Caleb's cries, sometimes just standing there, staring out the tall window toward the hills beyond the estate, as if waiting for someone who would never return. He barely spoke, and when he did, it was clipped, controlled, carefully weighed words like secrets wrapped in velvet. But Lena could feel him. Even when he wasn't in the room, she noticed the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. The tension in his jaw when Caleb reached for her instead of him. The way he flinched, ever so slightly when she laughed at Hazel's silly baby squeals. She was becoming something in this house. Not just a nurse, not just a mother, but something else. Still, something was wrong. Each night, when the babies slept and the halls turned to shadows, Lena wandered quietly through the mansion. She wasn't snooping, not really, but curiosity had started to replace fear. Why were so many doors locked? Why did some of the staff never make eye contact? And why did Grant look at her like she was both a ghost and a question? One night, after a particularly long feeding, Lena walked Hazel back to her crib in the nursery. The hallway was dim, lit only by the silver glow of the moon spilling through tall stained glass windows. Then she heard it. Voices, muffled. Behind the thick oak door of the study she had never been allowed to enter. She paused, her heartbeat suddenly thudding in her ears. "She doesn't know yet," said a deep voice. Grant's. "But she looks just like her. It's almost disturbing." Lena's stomach turned. Just like her? She pressed her ear closer, but the voices stopped. Silence fell again, heavy and abrupt. She backed away slowly, heart racing, and hurried back to the nursery, her mind spinning. Who was her? The next morning, Lena found Grant standing in the conservatory, bathed in golden light that filtered through the glass ceiling. He looked tired, hands in his pockets. The air between them hummed with something unsaid. She swallowed her nerves. "Do I remind you of someone?" she asked softly. He turned, met her eyes, and for a second, just a second, his walls cracked. "Yes," he said, his voice low. "You do." And then he walked away. Lena stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest. That answer, it wasn't just an admission. It was a door opening, a truth trying to push its way out. Later that day, while folding Caleb's blankets in the nursery, Lena noticed a small wooden box tucked into the corner shelf. Curious, she gently pulled it down and opened the lid. Inside was an old photograph. A woman, smiling, her eyes warm, holding a baby wrapped in a blanket identical to Caleb's. Her dark hair fell in waves around her shoulders. Her nose, her chin, even the way she cradled the baby. It was eerie. Lena felt her hands go cold. She looked just like her. Grant's wife, Claire Whitmore, the woman everyone said he had loved more than life itself. Was that why he had hired her? Was she a replacement? A ghost in flesh? Lena's mind spun with possibilities. Grief, guilt, obsession. She suddenly wasn't sure if she had been chosen because she was good with children or because she was her shadow. She stood there for a long time, the photo trembling in her hands, questions buzzing like bees in her chest. Was she truly needed here? Or had she stepped into the middle of a story that wasn't hers to finish? The day began with a strange stillness. The sky had been heavy since morning, clouds thick and low, sagging over the mountains like a dark blanket. By evening, the air was electric. Even Hazel stirred uneasily in her crib, whimpering in her sleep. Lena had spent most of the day in the nursery, folding tiny clothes and humming lullabies to calm the babies. Something inside her felt unsettled, like the quiet before a scream. By nightfall, the storm arrived. It didn't whisper, it roared. Rain pounded the windows with fury. Wind howled through the chimneys like a cry from another world. Lightning flashed, illuminating the estate in sharp white slashes, and thunder shook the very walls of the mansion. Lena was rocking Hazel in the nursery when the power snapped off with a jolt. Darkness swallowed the room. Hazel began to cry. Lena's heart jumped, and she quickly reached for the flashlight on the changing table. As she fumbled with the switch, the scent hit her. Smoke. Sharp, real. Not her imagination. She froze. Then the scream ripped out of her chest. "Caleb!" She wrapped Hazel in a blanket, clutching her tightly, and bolted into the hallway. The air was already thick with smoke. The storm outside had knocked something loose. Maybe a lightning strike, maybe a short circuit. But somewhere in the east wing, fire had caught, and it was spreading fast. The alarms hadn't sounded. No staff in sight, only silence and smoke. Panic clawed at her lungs. She ran barefoot, eyes watering, holding Hazel close. The halls were turning to shadow and heat. Somewhere far off, wood cracked with a loud pop, and the walls seemed to breathe fire. "Help!" she screamed, coughing. "Help! Someone! Caleb's still in the nursery!" Nothing. She stumbled through the corridor, blinking against the smoke. Her legs ached, her eyes burned, but she couldn't stop. Not now. She reached Caleb's room. The door was closed, heat radiating from the handle. She shoved it open with her shoulder, nearly collapsing from the wave of smoke that hit her. He was in the bassinet, red-faced, screaming, arms flailing wildly. The fire had left a scar on the east wing of the Whitmore estate, but something softer had been ignited between its walls. In the days that followed the storm, the mansion was quieter, but no longer cold. The icy grip of grief had begun to melt, like spring thawing a long winter. And at the center of that change was Lena. She moved through the halls now with a calm confidence, her presence no longer shadowed by fear. Hazel giggled more. Caleb reached for Lena with chubby fingers and toothless smiles, and even the house staff seemed to breathe easier when she was near. But the biggest change of all was Grant. He was still quiet, but no longer distant. His eyes no longer avoided hers. Instead, they lingered. One morning, Lena found him in the garden, the sun stretching golden fingers across the dew-covered grass. He was sitting on a stone bench, Caleb in his arms, gently rocking the baby as birds chirped softly overhead. It was the first time she saw him smile, not the forced kind, but one that came from a place deep inside. It startled her. It warmed her. "You're early," he said, glancing up as she approached. "Habit," Lena replied, setting Hazel in her stroller. "Nurses don't really sleep in." He nodded thoughtfully. Neither do grieving men. She sat beside him, the air humming quietly between them. For a while, they simply watched the babies. Caleb reached over to Hazel, giggling, and she cooed in response. Lena broke the silence. "They're starting to feel like siblings." "They are," Grant said, "in every way that matters." There was another pause. Then, without warning, Grant spoke again, his voice lower, steadier, like someone ready to break free. "My wife, Claire. She died before I ever held Caleb," he said. "I wasn't even in the room. I was downstairs. She was alone." Lena turned to him, her heart clenching. "She had complications we didn't expect. It all happened too fast. By the time the doctor came for me, she was already gone." He looked down at Caleb, his jaw tight. "I blamed myself. Still do. I should have been there. I should have known." Lena placed her hand gently on his arm. "You couldn't have known, Grant. You loved her." He shook his head, his eyes glistening now. "But I failed her. I failed him. I couldn't even hold my own child without remembering the moment I lost her." Lena swallowed hard. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Is that why you couldn't bond with him?" He nodded. Every time I looked at him, all I saw was what I didn't save. She stayed silent, letting the weight of his words settle in the space between them. "But then," he continued, looking at her, "you came." Lena's breath caught. "You didn't just care for him," Grant said. "You loved him. And not just him, Hazel too. You brought warmth into this house again. You laughed in rooms that hadn't heard joy in years. You made this place feel like home. Lena blinked back tears. I didn't do anything special. Yes, you did, he said quietly. And I need to tell you something else. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I lied. This wasn't entirely chance. He handed her the paper, her old resume with her photo attached. When your application came in, he said, your name didn't just catch my attention. It stopped me in my tracks. Why? My late wife's family was from Kentucky. Her maiden name was Brooks. Lena froze. She had a cousin who moved away when they were young. They lost touch. But when I saw your face, I thought maybe fate had sent me someone connected to her. Someone to save what I couldn't. Lena's throat tightened. You thought I was her? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Grant shook his head gently. No, you're not her. I see that now. He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they brushed hers. You're not her, he repeated, but you're someone I never expected, and everything I didn't know I needed. Lena looked at him, her heart thundering in her chest. There were no walls in his eyes now, only truth, only raw, beautiful honesty. She squeezed his hand. And what do we do with that? He smiled faintly. We start again, not in her shadow, but in your light. The summer sun poured over the Whitmore estate like honey, warm, golden, and slow. It had been 5 months since the fire, 5 months since the storm that changed everything. The East Wing had been rebuilt, but more importantly, so had the people within its walls. Lena sat on the wide front porch, the wood smooth and cool beneath her bare feet. The swing creaked gently as it moved back and forth, her body resting comfortably against a man she never expected to love. Grant sat beside her, his arm wrapped around her shoulder, his other hand holding a cup of coffee they'd brewed together that morning. They said little. Words weren't needed now. Out in the garden, Hazel toddled across the grass, her curls bouncing as she giggled. Caleb followed, slower but determined, his small legs wobbling with each step. Together they looked like two little stars orbiting one another, siblings not by blood, but by something stronger. Family. I never thought peace could look like this, Lena whispered, watching the children. Grant leaned down and kissed the top of her head, a silent agreement in the gesture. He had changed too, no longer the shadowed, broken man she met months ago. His smile came easier now. His eyes, once cold and grieving, now held warmth, life, and something even more powerful than grief. Hope. After the fire, Grant hadn't just offered her more money to stay. He offered something deeper, a home, a life, a place where her presence wasn't just needed, it was wanted. You don't have to go, he had said one night, weeks earlier, as they stood by the fireplace holding sleeping babies. I'm not asking you to stay as a caregiver anymore. I'm asking you to stay as you. They weren't rushing into marriage. There was no grand proposal, no diamonds, just two people choosing each other, one quiet day at a time. They shared morning coffee, bedtime lullabies, and the kind of laughter that only grows after pain. Lena had gone from being a woman nearly crushed under the weight of unpaid bills and loneliness to someone loved, respected, and whole. But not because she was beautiful or because she resembled someone else. She was seen for her strength, her sacrifice, her heart. And in that house once filled with sorrow, she became the center of joy. But outside their gates, the world had questions. The town whispered. Some were scandalized. A millionaire and a nurse? Others were quietly bitter. He picked her? What's so special about her? But slowly something began to shift. People began to watch, not with judgment, but curiosity, then respect. The gardener spoke kindly of her. The housekeeper called her Mrs. Brooks, even though no marriage had taken place. The bakery down the road kept a warm cinnamon roll aside just for her on Fridays. She didn't wear designer clothes, she didn't belong to country clubs, but she smiled at everyone. She carried 2 babies on her hips and held Grant's hand without apology. And little by little, the town began to understand something important. That love didn't come from the perfect match on paper. That family wasn't made by money or pedigree. That healing didn't come in straight lines. It came through fire, storms, and second chances. And then came the interview. A journalist, intrigued by the whispers, requested to write a piece on the Whitmore estate's unexpected love story. Grant hesitated. Lena agreed. And the article changed everything. It was titled, "The Nurse, the Widower, and the Home Love Built." It didn't speak of wealth. It spoke of loss, of courage, of a woman who fed a grieving man's child while nursing her own, of how grief brought two people together, not to fix each other, but to hold each other. And the world paid attention. Suddenly, Lena was receiving letters from single mothers, from widowed fathers, from people across the country who had believed love was beyond their reach. And every letter ended the same way. "Thank you for reminding us that love doesn't follow rules." Sitting on that porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees and the children chase fireflies, Lena felt a deep warmth rise in her chest. The past no longer had power here, only the present, only what came next. She turned to Grant and said softly, "You know, people used to say I wasn't enough. Not rich enough, not lucky enough, not right enough." He brushed her cheek with his thumb, eyes soft and full of wonder. They were wrong. She smiled, leaning into him as Hazel squealed with laughter in the yard. And the lesson, the one so many needed, settled gently in the twilight. Love doesn't ask where you're from, what you have, or what you've lost. It only asks what you're willing to give, and the answer always is heart.